Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Edge of Things, Episode 4. So it's my pleasure to welcome you. So I'm Frédéric Desbiens, Program Manager for IoT and Edge Computing at the Eclipse Foundation. And it is my pleasure to moderate this conversation about the PAC Radar Report. At this point in time, I would like maybe to start with a short round of introductions. So in the order on my screen, we'll start with you, Arnold.
Okay, so hello from my side. My name is Arnold Vogt. I'm an analyst with a clear focus on the topic of IoT. I work for PAC, which is a European-based analyst house with a clear focus on IT services and software. And we are in the market for more than 30 years. We have headquarters in Paris, and the major part of our analysts are based in Paris, in France, in London, in UK, and also here in Munich, in Germany.
That makes sense. Thank you, Arnold. Next is Jens.
Hi, hello. My name is Jens Reimann. I work as a software engineer for Red Hat, mostly in the area of messaging and specifically on IoT projects on the cloud side.
Thank you. Robert.
Hello, Robert Andres. I'm working for Eurotech as a Chief Strategy Officer, and in that function, I have a lot of work to do with the Eclipse IoT and Edge native working groups.
All right. Next is Ishu.
Hi, Ishu Verma. I am Technology Evangelist at Red Hat, working on emerging technologies. It used to be IoT for last 7 years, but now it's the last 2 years is Edge.
All right. And last but not least is Caroline. Unfortunately, it seems she's experiencing audio trouble, but let me cover that for her for the time being. So with us is Caroline Book. She's working at Bosch.io and essentially coordinating efforts between the various Bosch open source projects at Eclipse and other internal initiatives at Bosch. All right, so we'll get started with this conversation. So what brings us together is the publication of a report, and I'm using shorthand when I say the PAC Radar Report, but we'll dig a bit more about exactly what we're talking about. So Arnold, you told us a bit about, I keep saying PAC and you say PAC, so I suppose the canonical form is PAC, so I will try to stick with that. So what does PAC mean exactly, and what kind of firm are you exactly?
Well, we have the same problem like SAP, some call it SAP or SAP. So PAC and PAC, we have the same problem here. As I mentioned, we are an analyst house with a focus on the European market. We look into very different topics in the context of IT services and software. And the PAC Radar is basically a benchmark we are doing. We are doing many of them on an annual basis. And when you want to do it very crisp and very short, it's basically our magic quadrant, right? So what other analyst houses are doing regarding benchmarks, we are also doing benchmarks in very different topics. We are looking annually in topics like cloud computing, SAP. We just published one regarding ServiceNow. And what I do over many years now, I look into the topic of IoT and especially IoT platforms, and also with a strong focus on industrial IoT now for many years. So I work for PAC now since 5 years. I'm doing these benchmarks overall now for 8 years, so 5 years for PSC. Before that, I worked on the similar topic for another analyst house here in Germany. So I'm looking into this market now already for many, many years. And it's a very interesting and very broad topic I'm looking in. So what I mentioned is really that IoT is one topic beside many others. We are looking into it, but underneath IoT, I'm looking into 7 different topics, right? And this is a very broad topic we see, and we see already the evolution, let's say, from IoT to the next level. So I'm really looking into platforms, digital platforms in different aspects. They are integrating IoT, but not only IoT, they are also using analytics capabilities in different aspects. And I'm really interested to understand what is the next level of IoT. I want to give you an example. So I'm really interested also to understand what is happening in the factory space and who will build the digital platform for the factory of the future. So we see platforms with the ambition to build an app store and cloud-based app store for the digital factory. We see the same happening around edge computing, which is maybe more like a smartphone app store where you can download apps and use it within the factory. This is one aspect I'm looking into it. I'm looking also into the context of augmented reality and the connected worker. So what are solutions dedicated for operations people within the factories or on the shop floor? We are also looking into 3D printing and what are platforms exist today to give an holistic process really from ordering to the delivery. And we see a strong focus of some smaller companies to bring this together in an integrated approach. And one topic we want to discuss today here is really the context of open source based IoT platforms, because I strongly believe that IoT, it cannot be a closed system, right? So IoT have to be open. There is no other choice. We have so many different devices which we have to connect to summarize data, to bring this together. And this is really important from my perspective, that we have a very open approach in the context of IoT. And that's the reason why I really believe that open source
you froze for a moment.
Why we are also
So Arnold, if you can hear us, you froze for a moment there. Can everyone else in the presenter panel can hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So it seems the problem is on Arnold's side. So maybe we will revisit that. And essentially, I was about to ask Arnold, about specifically the report that brings us today, which is the Open Digital Platforms for Open Source Based Industrial IoT in Europe, 2021 edition. So that's quite a mouthful, but essentially, as Arnold was discussing, the focus is really on industrial IoT solutions in the context of open source. And there are a few takeaways for the report. And I was about to ask Arnold about this, but let me, in 20 seconds, cover that. So essentially, there are two key takeaways in the report. The first one being that Eurotech and Bosch are best-in-class vendors in the space of industrial IoT solutions based on open source. And the second takeaway being that the Eclipse IoT Working Group, which I have the pleasure to oversee as a foundation member staff, would be the best IoT open source community in the market. Now we'll dig a bit on this, and essentially let's start with open source as a business model. We keep saying open source is important, open source is relevant to IoT. I think it's worth taking some time discussing those assertions and show that it's actually true. So we'll start here. If you can hear us, Caroline, can you hear us? All right, excellent.
Yeah, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Okay, wunderbar. Excellent.
Cool.
So sorry about the technical difficulties there. So in your perspective at Bosch, why is open source to IoT and edge computing?
So I'm sorry, the last half sentence I didn't get because of audio issues.
Oh, sorry. So in your opinion, you as an employee of Bosch, working at Bosch.io, the software subsidiary, so why is open source important to IoT and edge computing?
Okay, yeah. For us, it's very important because it's, of course, an integral part of our product strategy to bet on the right platform force, so to say, to share with a large community the implementation and also maybe architecture decisions, and do that on a sound basis, so we can have this community as a driver for this platform, and also for the future deployments of the technology we are developing in this in the IoT space. And it's also important for our developers to contribute there. They really like it, the working style also. So it's, from a strategic perspective, it has a high level of importance, but also more the operational perspective as well.
That makes sense. And so traditionally, Bosch was not necessarily a company you would associate with software or open source. So was it a big shift in the way that you are building products and doing business, generally speaking, for you?
For me personally, not so much, because I'm not like a natural Bosch kid, so to say, or something. We were like a Bosch company that has a software company that has been acquired, where open source was more in the genes of the way of working. But I think, though you might not assume that Bosch is a high or has a high footprint in software development, there are a lot of in the meantime, and I'm speaking about like more than 10 years, a lot of activities around open source, and also a huge understanding why it is important. We have not only contribute to the open source worldwide open source community, we also built up a development system, and we call it Bosch Open Source, that we use for internal collaboration as well. So I think the idea of doing things together in a community and to share the knowledge and to bring this forward to get the spirit of all the people, that is very strong in the Bosch group, and for especially when it comes to software development. But we also try to bring this to the hardware development part, and to make this a more common movement within the Bosch world.
That makes sense. And so at the other end of the spectrum, we should say, is Red Hat, as a company that started as an open source software business from the ground up and has been around for many, many years now. So Ishu and Jens, in your opinion, why is open source important to IoT and edge computing?
Jens, okay, all right. So I think the key here is, you already alluded to it, that it needs to be open and interoperable, right? No single, considering the number of use cases and the possibilities and complexity of system, it's possible to build a solution with a single vendor, but then it does not provide the flexibility to scale it to other business units or other use cases within a single company, forget a single industry. So I think that's why open source is a key piece of puzzle, that it needs to be built on open source. So that, and I think it was also mentioned in the report that you don't want a single entity controlling it, right? So you want it to be where it's a level playing ground, where all the vendors can participate, collaborate, and bring the solution, and customers get to decide what works for them, right? Instead of so I think from that perspective, open source is a key requirement for building definitely IoT, but also I think as we move to the edge, we are seeing the same thing where customers are demanding that solutions be interoperable. Yes, it's easy to get to market with a single vendor, but I think they are aware that as they scale and expand, they want to have the flexibility to be able to choose and change solutions as time goes by. So I think from that perspective, open source is important as well.
Certainly. And finally, Robert, same question to you. Why in Eurotech's perspective is open source important to IoT and edge computing?
Now, besides that, we've been contributing to open source long before we joined, and we're becoming part of this founding circle of the IoT working group. We've been committing into open source, like working on Linux kernels for very special applications, but contributing back to the system, to the open source community heavily. And then I think for a size of, company our size, it is ranging really from an ability to give a clear commitment to open standards and in that way to open source community by contributing heavily to serving those customers that are really, especially on the OT side, are very scared about being locked in to a single vendor. So I think that's even more the case than on the IT side, where companies need to get out of it. So IoT in general, and we said that before, requires an ecosystem approach. It's very unlikely that there is one player out there that does it all in the right way, at the right depth, with the right quality. So open source helps tremendously to scale and also keep up to date with technology trends in a community fashion.
So it seems to me they are both technical advantages and business advantages of doing open source. And to me, that's probably in my very biased perspective, right? Working for an open source organization, it's really the combination of both that makes it powerful, in the sense that it gives you an edge, certainly at the technical level, and then it's a sustainable business model at the same time. Now, digging a bit deeper, we've been talking about Eclipse IoT and stating, Arnold, one of the key findings of your report. You had the specific assessment of our IoT working group, and we'll come to that a bit later. But essentially, in the Eclipse IoT working group, there are 50 plus open source projects. Not all of them are as active as the others and all of that. So very briefly, before we cover other topics, for each of the organizations represented here, can you just tell us a few words about the Eclipse IoT open source projects you are involved in and what they are in a few words? So maybe starting with you, Jens.
Sure. I think Red Hat is involved in a bunch of those projects. For example, Eclipse Cura, Eclipse Hono. We are contributing there. So we are trying to add small bits and pieces and improving that from what we can do. I also think that one project to call out is the IoT packages project, which is going in this direction of interoperability, where we're trying to bring different Eclipse IoT projects together in a joint deployment to show what the value add, or like adding multiple projects together and having this bigger together approach, and show that, and not only in a way that we can do that, but also that everyone can do it in 15 minutes. That is the goal that we have. But given 15 minutes time invest, you should be able to run that locally and go from there on and explore deeper in what the other projects can bring you.
So in a way, it's a way to, I would say that, to lower the barrier to entry to the ecosystem by providing you pre-configured environments you can kick the tires on before going further in your exploration.
Exactly.
Okay. And how about you, Robert? What is Eurotech doing in open source at Eclipse IoT?
So actually, we started back then in the founding at times working with IBM on PAHO, which is the MQTT client that is so popular globally in industrial environments. And then actually went on to contribute some of the core software elements that we have and assets we have in our company to open source to the Eclipse IoT working group as a consequence of the positive experience we made there. So, and I have to say, a good part of that has happened with the help and influence of Red Hat, that not just was supportive, but an inspiration of many ways of getting these kind of things right, to the extent that we see now as a result in the PAC report, which I think is an amazing kind of success story of the working group altogether, right? And also our individual projects in this. It's amazing. So the projects that we are most actively driving are an edge application framework that is called CUDA, which is sort of getting the developer very close to a complete solution at the edge and laying the foundation for management and security and lots of other very important aspects. And then the cloud side of this, for not just the data management, but especially the lifecycle management of the edge. That is the project Kapua, And together, that's a proper enterprise-grade ready solution end-to-end from an IoT perspective. And I think that's one important aspect that was highlighted also from the research perspective from PAC, that it's kind of interesting how many end-to-end solutions are available in the Eclipse IoT working group.
Indeed. And finally, same question to you, Caroline. So Bosch is all over the place in Eclipse IoT with over 60 contributors over the time that participated to various open source projects. So what are your efforts focused today?
Yeah, I think I want to mention the three main projects where we also where we massively contribute and also have project lead and some of course collaboration. For example, with Red Hat is the Hono project, the Ditto project, and the Hawkbit project, but also others in the whole I would say IoT context, from connectivity to cloud connectivity, from device connectivity to cloud connectivity, all the aspects where where we find technology that we want to make use of in one or the other application or context. Yeah, this is where we focus our contributions from, at least the part of the Bosch world where I am. This is Bosch IO, so the part of Bosch that is a group of software development and digital business experts to bring the digital transformation at Bosch and also the IoT closer together. But also other parts of Bosch are contributing to Eclipse IoT, which are closer to the actual use cases. For example, like device manufacturing units who do also contribute to several projects where we also can realize this kind of collaboration among us, but also, of course, with other companies in our ecosystem to bring the best for the customer, so to say, is that they can rely on our technology also in the future, because it's has a high level of maturity in all aspects. But and then I would like to mention another activity that is all around automotive things and IoT, where there's also kind of initiatives at Eclipse where we contribute and where we are looking for like the ecosystem to collaborate with other companies, and for example automated driving frameworks and stuff that is more car related, not only like technology stacks in the IoT.
Absolutely. And I mean, you name all of those verticals, all of those industries, and they are literally the hottest focal points for IoT and edge development right now. So it's certainly an exciting space to be in, and especially in open source. Now, before we move back to open source, open source as a business model, but going a bit deeper about the dynamics in Eclipse IoT and all of that, I would like to ask you specifically, Jens and Ishu. There are a few other initiatives that don't necessarily live at Eclipse, but are highly relevant to IoT and edge computing that you guys at Red Hat work on, and at the same time that have an impact in Eclipse IoT and Edge Native, since they have been adopted in that community. So I heard names like Droge IoT and Scopper. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, sure. I mean, Red Hat in general contributes or works on all kinds of different base foundation technology projects. For example, Bluetooth Stack and D-Bus are projects which don't really come to mind in the context of IoT, but are necessary in that area. Fedora IoT might also be a project worth mentioning, which is Fedora, I think, is a known project, and there's an IoT spin-off of that too. Lesser known might be the Droge IoT project. That is an effort to actually go from the microcontroller up to the cloud side, focusing on the programming language of Rust. So there is a lot of benefit for security and performance when it comes to using Rust. And we're trying to leverage that on the microcontroller side. So really kilobyte of RAM, no dynamic memory allocation, and handle all of that. Up until the cloud side, where we have cloud-friendly APIs on technologies like Kafka. But of course, all of that only lives when you actually forward the data to some other IoT projects, and there the digital twin platform Ditto comes into play, for example, where we are feeding that data into there. And we're working on an example that takes the data even from Ditto out to stream sheets, which is also an Eclipse IoT project, to do some visualization and post-processing.
Nice, very nice. All right, earlier in our conversation, unfortunately, we had a little technical trouble, and unfortunately, I couldn't ask some questions to Arnold. So coming back to you, Arnold, about the report itself and how exactly you came to your assessment. So what kind of methodology did you use in order to build the report and evaluate the various companies that are mentioned in there?
Right, so I hope you can hear me again. So let's talk about the process and the criteria we are using around this radar. So the process, really the first step, and it's a very difficult step to identify really the relevant players we see in the European market. And regarding open source based IoT platforms, we reviewed more than 30 potential platforms. We sent out questionnaires to the providers. We have done many vendor briefings to understand exactly what are the solutions. And this is the basic process we use, right? And what's important for you also to understand is that the benchmark we are doing, the PAC Radar, it's not a feature and function comparison of technology, right? So, and from my perspective, honestly, these times are over that we as an analyst can sit down and say, okay, let's do check boxes. What are the specific feature and functions? Who have what in the portfolio, and then we say, okay, this is the best solution we see in the market. The market today is far too fast to follow this approach. When you do this in a benchmark, you have to do a benchmark, let's say, each second week, because you see so many updates frequently, it doesn't make sense. So technology and portfolio is important, but it's not everything. It's really necessary for us as analysts to understand through these benchmarks what is the strategy, what are the focus areas, and the speed of expansion and innovation, right? So the portfolio is the current visibility of the status, but it's very important to see how fast the vendors are able to move forward and to develop new solutions. And for this, the strategy and really the speed of innovation is very important from our perspective. And when we put this into place, into the context of open source, so what all this means, right? So from my perspective, and this is one of the criteria we are using, is really, okay, we want to see fast release cycles, right? We want to see fast updates, improvements of solutions. This is helpful, important, really necessary for clients, not just to do security updates, to fix bugs. It's also important that you really work on innovation. So what are the next steps behind IoT? Are you also looking into topics like analytics? What are the providers are doing in the context of the digital twin? What is happening around augmented reality? Because we all know that many of these technologies belong together, they fit together, and we need solutions to integrate all these capabilities, right, within IoT platforms. So we want to see fast release cycles. We want to see that the vendors are looking for new innovations. What is also very important for us is to understand clients, reference clients. So which companies are already using these type of solutions and for which use cases? This is also very interesting and important for us. And when we talk about open source, it's also very important from our perspective. And this is also one of the criteria. We want to understand the long-term commitment, right? And the trust level, because open source, it's important for clients that they can trust in providers and in communities who are working on open source. And for this, it's really important to understand there is not only one company behind these kind of solutions. It's really a community working together on this. This is important. And it's also important to see that this is a long-term commitment, right? So it's not just a short-term commitment. So really, especially in the industrial and in the enterprise level, when you look for an IoT provider regarding a platform, this is a long-term relationship, right? This is not just a short-term project. You are really looking for a long-term strategic partner, and therefore it's really essential to understand that this is a solution which is in the market in the long run, and you can really rely on the overall solution.
That makes sense. And so this brings us to a specific question about Eclipse IoT, in the sense when you had to drop due to technical difficulties earlier in the broadcast, I quickly summarized the findings of the report, and you have a very specific assessment of Eclipse IoT as an open source community in the report. So can you elaborate a bit on that and explain to the audience maybe what makes Eclipse IoT special in your assessment?
Let me put this together. So the key takeaways and also what is really special about Eclipse. So you mentioned already some of the things I highlighted in the report. Let me add one more point regarding key takeaways. What we see in the analysis is also that we see open source based IoT platforms with different use cases. So they focus on different use cases. And this is interesting to see that some of the open source based IoT platforms are really focusing on, let's say, simple IoT use cases, right? Very basic, just collecting IoT data and do some kind of visualization. So we see some examples and solutions in this space. We see also other vendors, they have not really a focus on an open source based IoT platform. For them, it's more an add-on to their standard business they have. For example, MathWorks, they focus on analytics capabilities, and they offer also an open source based IoT platform as an add-on. But the third group, and this is from my perspective the most important and the relevant, really the group of companies who is focusing on enterprise customers, on their needs, and especially on industrial IoT. So they are able to deliver individual services and support also consulting and system integration around the context of open source based IoT. They provide additional add-on functions for large-scale deployments. This is also very important. They provide basically the long-term commitment for the users, so that they can really trust on this. And that's the reason why we really believe that Eurotech and Bosch are really the leading vendors in this context, which we see currently in the market. And it makes absolutely sense that these leading vendors work together in a joint community, which is the Eclipse Foundation. So when we look into these kind of communities, open source based communities, so the strength is really, and this is going back to the criteria we discussed earlier, right? So the trust layer, especially for enterprise customers, that you have a government structure which is not led only by one company. So it's really a community working together. This is a very important aspect of open source based communities, especially as mentioned, the long-term commitment. So we see that the Eclipse IoT working group is already in place for almost 10 years. So this is a long-term commitment, and companies can really rely and trust on that this will continue. And the other aspect is really the vendor independency, right? Not one single vendor can dominate this. So this is overall an advantage of communities, right? But then we have to go another step deeper and say, okay, so what makes the Eclipse IoT working group special against others like communities we see from Linux, Apache. We see also FileWare as a community in the context of IoT and open source. And when we compare what these communities are doing, I don't want to say that they are in competition to each other, right? You're working also together with these communities, and this makes sense. But it makes sense for us as an analyst house to compare a little bit what are the focus areas. And then we have to say clearly that Apache is not focusing on IoT. It's an add-on for them. They have capabilities. They have some solutions like Kafka in this area, but they do not focus dedicated on the topic of IoT. When we look into Linux, it's a little bit different. So they have for sure a focus on edge computing and on the embedded space. So they focus for sure on IoT, but more on embedded and also on the edge part. But when we look into the Eclipse Foundation, I really have to say I see the broader picture on IoT. So they have a focus on embedded, they have on edge and gateways, and they are also looking into the IoT platforms, into the cloud and also on premise. So they have the broadest perspective on IoT overall, embedded, edge, and also the platform. And this makes the Eclipse IoT working group, from my perspective, really unique. They have the broadest scope. They have a real IoT focus. They have also the most projects I recognize in the market in the context of IoT. So this shows also this community is driving innovations and new projects more than other communities are currently doing. We see already, as mentioned, the long-term commitment in the market. And I want to also mention, we see also the dedicated focus of the Eclipse Foundation on the European market. The headquarter moved to Europe. So we see they have a strong relationship to the European market, and this one is really important for them. And that's the reason why we believe that Eclipse, and especially the IoT working group, is currently the leading working group in the IoT open source context.
Thank you for covering this in detail. And I must say, certainly, as we are starting to celebrate our 10th anniversary, it's impressive to realize everything that over time our community has built. So now, one aspect that has really been important since day number one at the Eclipse Foundation, and certainly since day number one for the Eclipse IoT working group, has been our focus on commercial success, in the sense that open source is not about charity. You know, we are doing work in the open and for free up to a point, but nothing is really free, right? And there are business goals, and in fact, open source is a business model. So I will ask to our members here on this panel in turn, how open source figures in their IoT commercial strategy. They are starting with you, Caroline, at Bosch. So how do you leverage those Eclipse IoT technologies that you build in the open in specific commercial products? You are muted, it seems.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the hint. Otherwise, would have been like nice or not so nice. No, sorry. I was just starting to tell you that we are using the code we develop in the Eclipse community and operate it, and then offer this as a service to our customers, alongside with, of course, consulting and implementation offerings, and also support plans that you can book alongside with it. So we are taking basically the code there and make a commercial product out of it, and that is true for the large parts of our Bosch IoT suite. That is our commercial IoT platform offering we have.
And what I find exciting about this is essentially what we like is open source is the ease of use and UI, polished UI that you put on this in the cloud, and you can subscribe to Bosch IoT Suite, from what I understand, on AWS or Azure at this point in time, and eventually other clouds. Now, what's really great is essentially that the core open source code and APIs are they are open source, but you are literally using the same thing in production on the cloud.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, we are putting the on the user interface or the portal on it, because that is very specific to the vendor. Of course, you need to have also follow some legal requirements and all the legal aspects that is coming with it. That of course you cannot do in the open source part, all the legal aspects when it comes to commercial offerings. But it's more or less we do not add too much magic to the open source project, so to say. So the product you receive from us is more or less what we also find in the Eclipse IoT community.
And this emphasizes what we do in our projects, in the sense that most, if not all, Eclipse IoT projects are really commercial grade and production quality. That's not proof of concept code and anything like that.
Absolutely not. So, and this is also what I think we really appreciate the work that has been done in the Eclipse IoT projects by the developers and project leads and architects and all the colleagues that are talking and doing actually the work there. So no, it's absolutely not just playground or something like that. That is really serious software development going on.
All right. And how about you, Robert? So you leverage at Eurotech Eclipse IoT technologies in commercial products as well. So how are you doing that?
No, it's fundamentally a very similar approach. It's taking the code that is developed as enterprise ready, right? So and that it means we are not changing that code in any way, right? So we add elements to it that you need to add to make it a commercially supportable product for a specific audience. Right. Just to give an example, one of the things is security end to end, right? So, and of course, the open source projects provide all the hooks to add different kind of technologies into it, depending on the kind of project that you have, the kind of target that you have in terms of assets to be integrated. Now, Eurotech as a company has decided to deliver an end-to-end security story that is based on X509, deep integration with TPM, hardware root of trust, device attestation. Now, and that means you need to do hardware-software integration. So that's one part, right? There is also an aspect of certification, and then adding on top of that all the service levels that you need in order to turn this into a commercially viable product. So, and that happens, but not touching actually the core code that is delivered. And it's actually best practice for many of our customers to do POCs and testing and playing, right, in an early stage with exactly those projects provided through the Eclipse IoT working group, and then stepping up and extending into areas where there needs to be a very specific, adaptation, extension to deliver on the promise, for example, of security.
Okay. And finally, a slightly different question to Red Hat. So Red Hat is an important contributor to several projects at Eclipse IoT. We discussed that. And in this case, there are even projects like the Scopper project from Red Hat, which is a network proxy that has been integrated in our edge computing platform, Eclipse IO Fog, and things like that. So great collaboration, but there are no, let's say, direct commercial equivalence between the work that's done at Eclipse IoT and what you're selling at Red Hat. So my question to you then would be, Ishu and Jens, how do your commercial offerings complete what's available in Eclipse IoT?
All right. So I think for Red Hat, what we strive to provide is the platform, right? And there are, and I think Arnold referred to it, that it needs to be multiple. It's not just IoT projects, but also there are other aspects like DevOps and how do you update these systems. So there are not only the projects that gets a IoT system started, but also how to maintain, update, manage it, integrate it with the backend system. So for Red Hat, we strive to provide a platform that allows you to take the best of Eclipse projects and our partners like Eurotech and Bosch, and then add their commercially supported offerings on running on these platforms, which are tested and validated. But we also need to make sure that from operations perspective and for a developer perspective, this workflow of from the time the application is developed or the project or products are time that they can be maintained and updated, and it's a continuously loop that it could be, continuously maintained. Arnold also started talking about, in the report, that one of the key requirements, as we've seen, especially since last year COVID, is that companies are looking for agility, right? They're looking for very quick way of transforming their production line from one part to the other. And especially on the edge and IoT, the scale is huge. You cannot do the same way you've been doing with manual intervention and people trying to build these purpose solutions. So you need to have this automation and the workflow that allows you to scale these solutions very quickly. So for Red Hat, I think what we are trying to do is bring some of these practices that we've been seeing in data center and enterprise and bring it to the edge and for IoT customers so they can deploy the same methodologies without putting additional effort of building purpose-built solutions just for IoT or edge. Jens, if you can add something more on technical side.
No, very well said.
I couldn't agree more. I should say so. All right, we are getting closer to the end of this conversation. I have still a few questions, but in the meantime, in the audience, if you have questions you would like to ask to any of our panelists, please put them in the chat or use the Ask a Question button. And if you're curious about the report, you see this call to action button at the bottom of the screen. Download the PAC Radar Report so you can get a copy of the report complimentary straight from the Eclipse Foundation. All right, now, okay, so we covered the various ways you interact with all of those Eclipse IoT open source projects, and there's even the edge computing perspective in there. So now I would take a step back and ultimately ask to each of you in turn, how does membership in Eclipse IoT bring value to you? So starting maybe with you, Robert.
Yeah, I think there's an important element here in being part of community that has earned the trust that is required to successfully deliver enterprise-ready products. So I think a lot of open source communities cannot deliver that to that extent as Eclipse does. So from a legal perspective, from an organizational perspective, and I would add now even from a marketing perspective, this organization has been maturing significantly over the last couple of years. So I think it's also that kind of trust that is now reflected in the report that we see. And I remember in all the years where we tried to talk to the analyst community about the relevance of open source in IoT. I think it's a great achievement that happened, and the way Eclipse does support all of us does tremendously support this and help in that.
All right, and I'm glad that you highlight that because in this case, on this panel, I'm the visible part of Eclipse, but there's the full staff of people dedicated to helping out the various projects that we've got. And when I say that, it's IP specialists that check the licenses on the various dependencies. It's people that actually develop and improve our development process and teach it or provide guidance about it to our communities. So there's a huge staff. Well, huge, not so huge, I should say. There's always room for more, right? But there's a sizable staff, let's say, that's really dedicated to support the projects, and I'm just the visible part of that. But really, they take the merit, and I just take the credit.
I think it cannot be underestimated, right? How important that work is. That turns what we do into something that is very dependable. It is a big part of that openness, of that ability to interface with others, right? Is getting all these aspects right.
All right. Now, continuing with the same question to you, Caroline, what kind of value membership in Eclipse IoT brings to Bosch? You're still muted.
I'm so sorry.
That's the bane of modern computing.
Yes, maybe also to keeping you from my background sound noise level, but okay. I'm sorry for that again. And I want to just set and contribute in second what Robert just said. It's for Bosch, as where legal compliance is a very huge issue. so we find this in every part of our organization. We are emphasizing this a lot and want to really make sure that this is done on a very sound basis. Eclipse IoT helps us tremendously that we can allow our developers to contribute to the open source space. It's not so easy in a big company context, to do all the checks and to really keep this IP issues well defined and everything. So yeah, that's one aspect that we really like about not that we like about contributing to Eclipse IoT, but we find it a very good place to do that, and also to stay in compliance with all our requirements and also internal regulations. But also, yeah, I think the community we find here, the cool spaces to contribute, to work together, to collaborate with colleagues from Red Hat, with colleagues from Eurotech, other colleagues in the in this universe, so to say, of IoT technologies, because it's it's many different pieces, a lot of cool ladies and gentlemen. So really a great place for also for doing the sound development work we already mentioned.
And I think your comment highlights one important thing, in the sense that open source is fantastic. It's the best way to do IoT and Edge, but not all open source is the same, right? Open sourcing your own code at random on GitHub is one thing, and then there are some single vendor projects that exist. We all have some examples in mind. I won't name them, but certainly there's value in having this vendor neutral community where essentially all the contributors are treated in the same way, right?
Yes, the platform is what makes it so special. It's a defined way of collaboration, and it's a very democratic way to do so. You need your expertise, you can bring it in there, you can have a sound discussions with other experts. So we find a lot of really great technical persons, and to really improve the quality of our implementations, but also of course of the projects where this collaboration is taking place. So yes, it's the platform, it's the way of working together, and of course some legal aspects also to it. And I want to mention something else. I really love the work in our Eclipse IoT steering committee. It's also great experience for me. Also, I learn a lot. We talk about also maybe stuff that is not so natural for more technology-oriented people, like marketing plans and program plans and all that stuff. So yeah, it's also a great way to structure our work and to learn for the business from that.
It certainly highlights a key thing that foundation staff is doing, in the sense that not only we take those projects and keep an eye on them, but we actively hype them and try to find a new audience for them all the time. At least that's what I'm trying to do when I go speaking around, and most of our members do the same. Now, last but not least, Ishu and Jens, what does your Eclipse IoT membership bring? How does it bring value to Red Hat?
It is hard to add what was already said, but I really would like to reiterate on this integration, or the Eclipse IoT community is really the community for IoT. You have access to very professional open source IoT projects, and I think this is what helps you when you want to bring different things together and want to validate that this is interesting for us, to validate this is running on our solutions. You can take that, and also, with the heart being a software developer, you can play with that technology and you can build something and learn something from that. And that drives also the innovation, where you have access to those really professional and also commercially supported software, and you can play with that, and you can verify and you can extend that. And if you start to extend that and start to contribute back, you actually see that this is being accepted. So you become part of that, no matter what you contribute. If this is relevant for those projects, there's a way to do that.
Certainly, and this brings to a bit of a counterintuitive fact, in the sense that you would think that you get the most value out of open source by just consuming the components, right? It's free, I can take this and build on it, but the actual value comes when you contribute, right? Why is that?
Well, as you said, it's not that it's free of charge. It is the freedom that you can change things. So if you have something that you require or you would like to see changed, you have the possibility to contribute that. Not every change makes sense for all projects, but if there's the consent that yes, this adds value to the project, then there's a chance to change that.
That makes sense. All right, so now would be maybe the time to look at questions for the audience. So let me check this. So if you have any questions at this point, dear audience members, please put them in the chat or use the Ask a Question feature. And we have a question in there from San. So he's asking, from an eagle's eye of view, where do you see Eclipse, the Eclipse IoT working group going in the next few years? I would like to hear Robert, Ishu, and in Caroline's point of view on that. So we highlighted it's the 10th anniversary. So where are we headed next? So maybe starting with you, Robert.
I think we had a couple of amazing years, right? And that trajectory, looking out in the future, if we keep that going the way it did over the last couple of years, I think we are in for a couple of other amazing stories. And not just from a code output perspective, but again, also from an organizational marketing perspective. And we gained a lot of momentum there. And it's kind of amazing to be, and we heard this before, being part of the steering committee and seeing the updates and seeing how much more traction the organization gets. I mean, how different is that from a couple of years ago? And also the openness, right? Going forward, even finding more synergy effects with open source ecosystems, whether they're inside or outside of Eclipse. We expect more to happen in that space and winning more relevance also because of that, right? Edge native is an example. We mentioned that before. Some of us are in the same kind of working group, also working at that level. It's bringing all these edge and OT kind of elements together under an umbrella that, if I might say so, is probably the most radical way of doing open source, right? With everything it takes. And we said that before. And again, I believe we can continue for quite a while on that trajectory.
Certainly. And so Jens and Ishu, what's your perspective on this? Where are we headed for the next 10 years?
Maybe I'll start and Jens can finish me. I think all the participants talked about the wonderful work and the collaboration that's been happening. And I think technology-wise speaking, there is amazing amount of work that has been achieved in last several years. Going forward, I think probably wearing my marketing hat, I would say that probably we need to put more focus on getting the word out and getting more adoption of what's already there and coming. So there is greater adoption of projects and greater adoption of taking these and showing that as a proof point of working solutions in like downstream companies, right, which are taking this and actually running it, and then starting a feedback cycle where more companies see the examples and adopt it. So I think probably what I would like to see happen next 10 years is adoption scaling as much as technology has been scaling for these projects.
So any further thoughts on this, Jens?
So I think what happened in the last 10 years is that open source was brought to a sector that was traditionally closed source. So the Eclipse IoT working group definitely has an impact there. Looking forward, maybe we have the chance to make this even a broader spectrum. So open hardware becomes suddenly a topic, and maybe also going direction of firmware development, more open sourcing that. I think this is maybe not a central focus on Eclipse IoT, but has definitely touching points.
Yes, certainly. And in fact, we have a sister organization that some people don't know about, which is called the Open Hardware Group, where essentially they are taking the open source RISC-V instruction set and building on GitHub in the open processor cores that people can simply download and try on an FPGA, or even, well, if you have a bunch of money, you can go to a foundry and get actual chips made out of that. But the fact is that the chips are verifiable, developed in the open and all of that. So the open source model is really spreading to hardware on the top of software. And in IoT, there's this premium put on customization. I want to tailor everything to my use case. So certainly there's great value in there. Now, getting a more neutral perspective on all of this with I'm quite sure there will be future revisions to this report in the years to come and all of that. But when you look at the state of the IoT market, where are we headed? Where should what are the trends that our audience should look for or should keep an eye on?
So yeah, it's always the question, so what is next? So when we see IoT as a starting point, the digital twin is, from my perspective, really the next interesting aspect. So not only connecting things, we have to build models, we need a joint semantic, that the interaction between things will work. So this is an interesting aspect, the digital twin. We need standards for this. And also the next aspect I'm seeing then in this context is really something which is called like a knowledge graph, so that we get more understanding and automation around IoT connected devices. This is a complex topic, from IoT to digital twins to knowledge graphs. This will be for sure a topic around for the next 10 years.
All right. Thank you for this perspective. All right, so that would be the end of this panel. So at this point in time, a big thank you to each and every of our panelists. So Jens, Robert, Ishu, Caroline, and Arnold, thank you so much. The Eclipse IoT Working Group is always on the move. So right now we are having our annual IoT and Edge Developer Survey, which is ongoing. So please participate in that and help us gather useful market data that then will enable our members and even non-members, because we publish that under Creative Commons when we publish a report. So please help us understand the industry and provide insights that will inspire our open source projects in order to deliver better features and even brand new platforms to address new needs. And then this is not the last episode in the Edge of Things series. We'll have other episodes upcoming. So stay tuned to our social media. We'll be scheduling probably the next one fairly soon. So in any case, thank you once again to our panelists. And I'm Frédéric Desbiens from the Eclipse Foundation, managing IoT and Edge computing programs there. Thank you for watching this episode of the Edge of Things, and see you next time.
Ciao.